I've got Jonathan Turley here. You recognize his face because he's everywhere all the time. You're one of the best commentators on the law that the country has. You're the guy.
Thank you. That's so nice of you to say.
And it's true. That's why it is good to say. Law professor at George Washington University.
Correct.
And you've got a best-selling book. It's called The Indispensable Right. And people hear that may think right and left. Well, no. It's the right that we hold as citizens, a constitutional right, free speech in an age of rage. And I want to talk to you about that book. It's been praised by the Wall Street Journal on the one hand. It also got praise from the former president of the ACLU. How does that happen? Why is that possible?
Well, I am really thrilled by the response to the book. And I am thrilled that it did bring in people from different ends of the political spectrum, because this is really our shared legacy as a people. This is what defines us, is free speech. And one thing that the book tries to lay out is that the most revolutionary act of the American Revolution was what became the First Amendment. There was no precursor for what we said about free speech. Freedom of religion is much of the same. Those two rights were true American rights in how they were defined by the First Amendment. And people often don't realize that. Great Britain never did support free speech, and they still don't. In some ways, this sort of came out of the head of Zeus at the time. There were some people writing, which were people that were called the levelers and others, about free speech. But what became the First Amendment, the world had never seen before, and it still is revolutionary. I have a colleague who's leading a popular movement to amend the First Amendment because she feels that it's too, quote, aggressively individualistic, and she wants to change the language.
But that's what we are. It's America. That pretty much defines us.
That's right. And so one of the purposes of this book, why it took 30 years to write this book, is I wanted to do something more than deal with the insular conflicts about free speech, and to try to answer why we are still struggling with free speech after so many decades. And part of it is because we've never really defined what free speech is.
And that's something I want to ask you to do. That's the next thought that I have for you. At First Liberty, our focus is religious freedom. And that's all we do. We do religious freedom cases in the courts. But often as not, that also involves hand-in-glove free speech as well, because it's about someone who wants to share the gospel in a park. It's about someone who wants to have a menorah on their property at their building in New Jersey. It's about all these cases where people want to have expression as well. We take free speech for granted to the level that I dare say most Americans couldn't even really give you a cogent definition of what that means, even though we say it all the time. Define it for us as a law professor.
Sure.
What sets it apart in the American experience that we have this thing called free speech?
Well, first of all, it's such a pleasure to talk about this with First Liberty, because First Liberty is the true tip of the spear. They have always been there. They're the ones that hold these first principles most closely. And they then walk the walk. You know, they don't hold conferences. They hold courtroom arguments, and they win, which is also pretty remarkable when you look at that record. You know, free speech and the freedom of religion are tied together. We see that in cases like 303 Creative most recently. The book's title captures that. The Indispensable Right comes from an opinion by Louis Brandeis, one of the greatest civil libertarians, who wrote poetically about how you need freedom of speech for every other right, including freedom of religion. You can't have freedom of religion, freedom of association, other rights without freedom of speech. And you saw that in the 303 Creative case, of the importance of freedom of speech. And yet, the reason I use that title is because it came in a concurrence where Louis Brandeis signed off on the conviction of a woman who was arrested for speaking against lynchings. And so the question is, when you have a great civil libertarian like Louis Brandeis writing this beautiful concurrence, and then at the end say, I concur, it shows that even Brandeis had lost his way. So the book returns to this moment of clarity we had at the beginning of the American Republic. And that clarity, in my view, was we recognized that there are natural rights, rights that are not created by government, but given by the Creator to human beings.
With a capital C.
Yes. And the founders believed in that. They believed in the writings of people like John Locke. You know, Locke described the state of nature with a very interesting aspect to it. In that, when you look at how his description is, before we created society, government, civilization, he's referring to rights. He's referring to the fact that those human beings in the state of nature had rights. So the question is, where did they come from? And Locke made it clear they came as a gift from God. And the framers understood that. And you see that in the Declaration of Independence, where they refer to these rights as a gift from the Almighty. And that concept of a natural right was lost. It was established in the First Amendment. It existed in this twilight, and then it vanished during the Adams administration. They defaulted to the British view and adopted what I call in the book a functionalist view of free speech. That it goes something like this, that we protect free speech because it has this function to make democracy better. Well, it does that. It does make democracy better.
Yeah.
But it does much more than that. Because if you protect free speech because of its function, it means that you can do trade-offs. It could mean that there's some speech is good speech, some speech is bad speech. Some speech is good for democracy, some speech is not so good.
Right.
And that's why figures like Brandeis could write these wonderful concurrences and sign off on sending someone like Charlotte Anita Whitney to jail for speaking against lynchings.
It's true, and we've seen this over and over again in history. We take free speech for granted. We think everybody has it in every country the world over. It's not true that everyone has that right. Whenever those rights which come from God are taken away by government, really bad things happen almost immediately.
Yes, and you know, my book is a bit controversial because natural law and natural rights are largely condemned by law professors today. They go as far as to say that the framers never really believed in natural rights, which I think is just clearly wrong. And we have had spirited and respectful debates, but I think that they're clearly wrong. The framers did believe that the American Republic was formed on natural rights. And the question that I pose in the book is for people to make a choice early on what they believe free speech is, because the problem is that we always have debates without resolving that question. To understand what free speech is, you have to understand what human beings are, what we need to be fully human. And we need speech. We need to be able to project part of ourselves in the world around us, whether it is religious speech or political speech or social speech or artistic speech. We have this insatiable desire to project part of ourselves in the world around us. And if you agree with that, then it changes the dynamic in these conflicts. It means that you are going to be less likely to do trade-offs. You're going to have a much higher threshold. And while I've been called a free speech absolutist, which is not true, there's no absolute rights in the Constitution. It's true that I tend to oppose most limits on free speech. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I believe that the best cure for bad speech is good speech. And one of the things the book, by the way, points out, and I often point this out with my friends and when we have debates, is I note that in the history of the world, there has never been a single censorship system that has ever worked. Censorship has a complete failure rate. It has never stopped a single idea, a single movement, never. And yet, we're in one of the most dangerous anti-free speech periods in the history of this country.
One of the things you said, and you've touched on this already, but I want to let you build it out a bit. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were not only written for times like these, but in a time like this. The founders know what we're going through right now because they lived it.
No, it's funny. I was in a hearing once, and one of the Democratic members says, it said, you know, Professor Turley, I know you're going to talk about James Madison and the framers, you always do, but times have changed. Mm-hmm. People today talk like they want to kill each other. And I interrupted the member and I said, I just kept with one clarification, if you would indulge me. When this was written, they were actually trying to kill each other. They were talking about it. You have people like John Adams, who was arresting people who were his critics. Mm-hmm. And that's the Constitution we have. It's written for the worst of times. And I'm a Madisonian scholar, and I adore Madison, as my students will tell you, probably to an unhealthy degree. And but Madison was the ultimate pragmatist. And I always chafe a little when in debates people will refer to Madison as almost a cynic. He wasn't. He had an unvarnished view of human beings. He thought human beings were capable of magnificent things, but he accepted them for who they were. I think that was a more genuine love than some of the sort of Rousseau followers of the time that viewed all these noble savages and were shocked when Paris turned into the terror in the French Revolution. Madison accepted us for who we were. He understood that we would create factions, that we would have tensions, we would have rage. And he created a system that would allow us to be who we are and maybe become something better than who we are.
And that, what you just touched on, I've thought about a lot, and that is the founders understood that people are good and bad, and they tried to frame a constitution that allowed for those shortcomings. They were trying to build a nation in full view of the fact that we can really mess things up if left to our own devices.
No, that's absolutely right. And the key that people need to understand is I have a new book coming out called Rage in the Republic on the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
We're going to get to that. That's the next question.
Well, one of the things I talk about in Rage in the Republic is what makes the American democracy unique. But part of it was also the belief of the founders in these rights, these natural rights. They needed to protect faith. They came here to protect faith. They believed that you had a right to pursue faith. But also faith has a critical role in our government. That what I say in the book is that democracy isn't even mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Liberty is. It was about liberty.
Yeah.
And liberty was there to protect faith. And then faith gave the foundations for civic virtue. So by protecting faith, you unleash civic virtue and fealty to the government. And the reason this is important, as I talk about in the book, was Reverend Mayhew, who was one of the most significant figures in the American Revolution and not well known to many people today. But it was his sermons that gave the foundation for the American Revolution. And Mayhew dealt directly with the most common argument used to demand blind loyalty to the king, and that's Romans 13. And Mayhew gave a brilliant sermon in which he destroyed the Romans 13 argument and explained that it was virtual blasphemy to cite Romans 13 to support the English throne, because he said that that's not what Paul the Apostle was talking about. It was not that you have blind loyalty to, quotes, God's minister, if the minister is denying the gift of God, if he's denying these natural rights. And he said, it's ridiculous to suggest that what Paul was saying was you need to support a tyrant who's denying you what the Creator gave you. Those sermons gave the American Revolution the foundation that they needed. It untethered them from this common argument and told American colonists that if you truly believe in faith, then you have to fight for faith. And then whatever tyrant's denying you that right is not one of God's ministers.
In our form of government, speaking of Romans 13, part of our responsibility as citizens is to speak into the government. It is a government of, for, and by the people. Romans 13 would direct us that we need to speak into that we need to be actively informing our government about our thoughts on the way that this country should be going on and what's ahead. What do you see ahead for us? How do we work out of this time of rage that we're in to get back to what the founders intended for us to actually be able to have honest debate, honest discussion, exchange of ideas?
It's a great question. In the Indispensable Right, I talk about rage a lot. And rage is a strange thing because it gives you a license to do things and say things you would not ordinarily do or say. And, when I was covering the Trump trial and I left the courtroom after the verdict and I went out into the streets in Manhattan, there were people dancing. It was ecstasy. They were dancing in the street. What they wouldn't admit about the rage that I was seeing is that they like it and that they need it. They won't admit it's contagious. They won't admit it's addictive, but it is. But it's not the rage that threatens us. It's when rage rhetoric becomes state rage. It's when the government uses the rage to expand its powers. The reason the book says free speech in an age of rage is it's not our first. This country was born in rage. That's what the Boston Tea Party was. It was pure, unadulterated rage. It was also a crime. But we go through these periods, and then we get our senses about us. And we remember that we have this article of faith that is found in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it's so much greater than our petty divisions. And we tack back. I think we'll do that again, even though this is the most serious anti-free speech movement in our history. In the end, it's not about the rage, it's about us. It's about free speech.
At First Liberty, we're going to be talking a lot about the 250th anniversary of this nation of ours and the rights that we hold dear as Americans. Tell us again, the name of your book coming out is?
It's Rage in the Republic,
and
the
it comes
unfinished
out,
story of the American Revolution.
And it comes out?
It comes out at the beginning of 2026. They're holding it for their anniversary book.
Okay, tell the story behind it, though. You got a little extra time before they were going to release it. And what did you do?
My wife basically told the editors at Simon & Schuster that they were killing her because their decision to hold the book meant that I had more time and I rewrote the book.
You rewrote the entire book.
And so Leslie said, you don't understand my husband. You need to publish the book or he'll continue to rewrite it. So they're destroying my marriage.
You got 2 swipes at it. It's got to be awesome.
Well, I'm convinced the Republic will survive. My marriage, I'm not sure. But hopefully both will survive.
Very good. Jonathan Turley, great talking to you.
Thank
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.